Crystal Palace, who have got to an FA Cup final for the third time in their history.
The Abbott goal was fantastic, and then Ismaila Sarr, who scored 2 in the 4-1. He could have had 4 in the game himself, a couple of headers that might have gone in.
And when we come to the cup final and people start... The Joy of Football podcast. With me, Neil Barnett.
And with me, Martin Tyler.
Looks for Xavi! Rooney! Aguero!
The Joy of Football. One game, Martin, from Crystal Palace, who have got to an FA Cup final for the third time in their history.
Well, I have to pick the game that got them to the FA Cup final for the third time in their history. Again, they're going to meet a Manchester club. Twice it's been Manchester United in the past. Now it's Manchester City.
And a game you commentated.
Yeah, I did. And I had, I'm sure he won't mind me mentioning this, I had a coffee with Ray Lewington, who used to be Roy Hodgson's assistant for many years at Crystal Palace, the day before the semi-final. And Ray was off to MK Dons to see his son Dean. They had Dean Lewington Day at MK Dons. I hope that went well for all involved. But Ray said to me, "Oh, Palace will win." And really on the form guide and the fact that, you know, Aston Villa have done so many impressive performances, they really could have been in a semi-final in the Champions League, the way they've been going, you know. So they would have been favourites for most people. But they are the one factor facts that made Palace a good shout. Maybe Ray was taking this into account. I think the previous games was 5-0 on the last day of last season at Selhurst Park to Palace. Palace then knocked Villa out of the Carabao Cup at Villa Park, 2-1. Then they drew 2-2 there in the Premier League. And then recently this year, they won 4-1 at home in the reverse fixture again at Selhurst Park. So if you throw in the 3-0 that happened after that, it's a pretty dominant set of stats, isn't it? They'd never beaten Villa before in the FA Cup, so Villa had a bit of history on their side. And clearly when you make comparisons between the two clubs, the history of a founder member of the original Football League, and Palace could only match that by being a founder member of the third tier of English football over 30 years later. But it was, football's about moments, the moments that matter. I thought the disallowed goal was wrong. I thought Ezri Konsa got away with one when Mateta went on to score. Anthony Taylor thought otherwise, but a couple of minutes later, the Abbott goal was fantastic. And then Ismaila Sarr, who scored 2 in the 4-1 that I mentioned, got 2 he could have had 4 in the game himself, a couple of headers that might have gone in. So they suited. It's the kind of, if you put a boxing analogy, Palace the kind of fighter who are their best against the style of the opponent, like Aston Villa. Villa come on to them. Palace weren't going to press. Villa wanted to play around, lure them in. Palace didn't fall for that. And then when the turnovers happened, just a bit of lack of pace at the back. I think, well, let's say that the quicker players belong to Crystal Palace. And they, as we've said a few times, they made them pay. That's for sure. So that's my all credit to Oliver Glasner. They're a good bunch, Palace. They're like a lot of these clubs, with a lot of underdog clubs around in our talking this season. They would come into that category. They'll be underdogs again in the final. Funnily enough, we talked last week about the game when I was Darren Cahn's guest at Manchester City, which was Manchester City against Crystal Palace. And Palace were 2 up and very nearly 3 up by a very tight offside call, and then lost 5-2.
But there were Kevin De Bruyne, and he didn't play in the semi-final for City.
No.
And if he doesn't play in the final...
It wouldn't be as a farewell game because the final's not the last game of the season. And that's another subject for another day. But so that's my game for Crystal Palace.
Well, I've seen Palace twice this season, home and away against Chelsea, and I want to pick out, both games finished 1-1, and I want to pick out the away game. But just before I do, in the home game at Stamford Bridge, Dean Henderson was outstanding. Now, I'm not a big Dean Henderson fan, but he was outstanding.
He was very good in the semi-final as well.
And I would argue that he's had his best season ever this season. And I think he is now a better goalkeeper than at any time in his career. And I find that quite interesting, just as an aside. But the game at Selhurst Park, Oliver Glasner came up with one overriding tactic for that game. I don't know what made him do it, but it was unbelievably effective. And he constantly had diagonal passes pinged out from middle of the pitch and left of the pitch behind Cucurella for Daniel Munoz, the right back, to run onto. Now, we've talked a little bit about Daniel Munoz on here. He is, I think, with Oli Aina, as I now have to call him, they are the two best right backs in the Premier League this season for me. And Munoz was outstanding in this game. He kept charging beyond Cucurella onto these diagonal balls, and his use of the final ball was absolutely magnificent. I think that if by some chance Palace do beat Manchester City, that Glasner will be a target for the big clubs. And I don't mean clubs who have finished better in the season than Palace. I mean the big clubs, and I'd be particularly looking at Tottenham. And I think that Munoz, whatever happens, will be a target for big clubs because he has been an outstanding player all season. And when we come to the cup final and people start comparing like for like in the team, Crystal Palace will have the best right back on the pitch. Whoever City fields.
They were 3-0 up, and he still was making runs to try and get a fourth goal at Wembley, which is notoriously a sapping surface, and it was a warm afternoon. So yeah, he's a road runner, isn't he? He keeps going.
Yeah.
A real outstanding signing, which happened before Glasner.
Yeah,
but only a couple
January
of weeks
last
before,
season when Roy Hodgson was still manager.
Yeah. I was going to say Adam Wharton is another very important, who came in the same time as Daniel Munoz, and he did exceptionally well on the second goal of the game, Sar's first goal. But he's a top quality player. And Glasner took Mateta off, Eze off, he took Wharton off, and the game was still in the balance, but he believed in himself. And of course, he's won the Europa League with Eintracht Frankfurt, and one of the stories leading up to the game was that he went to see them when they came over and they played Spurs, of course, recently, the leg in London, and Oliver went to the Eintracht hotel and caught up with a few old friends. We couldn't quite find the recipe for beating Tottenham for his old club, could he? So.